So as you know, I've been talking about the manufactured epidemic of sexual harassment and sexual assault on Australian university campuses that culminated with the Human Rights Commission report released last month. Despite the results of the survey showing no epidemic, most of the media and all the universities fell into line with the epidemic narrative. And now, to signal their virtue, universities are instituting compulsory consent classes. Well, one of those journalists who hasn't bought into the mainstream narrative is Bettina Arndt. Bettina is a voice of reason on these issues, and with her permission, I'm reposting her excellent piece on consent that she posted on her channel today. Enjoy.
How come drunk women can't give consent to sex, but pissed men are held responsible for every fondle or grope? Isn't that infantilising women and demonising men? This is Bettina Arndt, and I'm talking today about the new sexual consent courses being taught in Australian universities. One more example of feminist ideology which is distorting relationships between men and women. But to start with, let's go back to where it all began, which was August the 1st, my birthday, which I spent frantically talking to experts, professors of statistics, experts in surveying, helping me plough through the data that had just been released about the rape crisis on our campuses. As you may know, I was one of the very few journalists in Australia in mainstream media who called out the fake stats being promoted by most of our media when it came to the release of the Human Rights Commission survey on sexual assault and harassment at our universities. Writing in The Australian, I pointed out the survey showed very good news, very little rape, and most of the harassment was staring, which most students didn't think was worth reporting. I love the attack on me by Lenore Taylor in The Guardian, who denounced my interpretation of the statistics and went on to promote the rape crisis on campus. Her final sentence quoted the US Secretary of State, Madeleine Albright, saying there's a special place in hell for people who don't help other women. Well, Lenore, I know you're going to think this contributes even more to me finding that special place in hell, but I like to think it's helpful to women to encourage them to act like responsible adults. One of the most striking things about the reporting on the rape crisis was the number of stories about rape accusers who were drunk at the time of the alleged incident. Look at this woman on ABC 7:30 report that day, which claimed that the survey had showed alarming levels of rape and harassment.
And I was so drunk that I don't think I could even walk by myself. He was like holding on to me, walking me, and I think I knew what was going to happen, but I was sort of so drunk that I just like went along with it.
Here's another one on the same program.
We were both quite intoxicated. I was much more intoxicated than he was, and he separated me from my friends, and we went back to a room where we were both staying, and that was where it happened.
Candice Jackson, a top Trump education official, hit the headlines recently with her claim that 90% of sexual assault claims on campuses in America involve couples who are both drunk. Of course, she was jumped on from a great height by all the feminists and forced to apologise for the comment. But it seems pretty likely that much the same statistic would apply here. Of course, when it comes to the so-called rape stories we all hear about in the media, they're all horrific stories of women falling victims to groups of men or having their drinks spiked or finding themselves in the hands of serial predators. And what the media is doing is highlighting the stories about predatory men, because most journalists are busily promoting the feminist narrative that all sexual activity involving an intoxicated woman is sexual assault because she cannot give consent. And discouraging female students from drinking risks blaming the victim and shaming women into not seeking help. But that's only part of the story. Listen to Pauline Wright. She's president of the Law Society of New South Wales and recently appeared on the SBS's Insight program on sexual consent.
They've both had a few drinks. They've had they're boyfriend and girlfriend. They regularly have sex. They both get drunk. They go home, and the usual thing for them to do would be to have sex. The girl might be saying yes, but then perhaps the next day think that it was wrong. Maybe they split up the next day. I don't know. But it bothers me that because she was drunk, that her saying yes, the law might say no, that she didn't have the capacity to say yes because she was drunk. That becomes really difficult for a young man.
Wright also described a first date where the girl thinks she doesn't want to have sex, but then they have too much to drink and end up in bed.
The next morning, he doesn't call, he doesn't ring her, she feels humiliated. Is that then a sexual assault?
Certainly most juries wouldn't think this was rape. They rarely convict in date rape cases involving contradictory he says, she says evidence, which constitute the bulk of campus rape allegations. That's why the activists are pressuring universities into getting involved in these sort of cases and promoting their simple narrative of the man as the perpetrator and the woman as the victim, the theme which is now totally dominating all discussion of sexual consent on our campuses. A few months ago, the University of Canberra's website included a party safe page advising students, pace yourself when you're drinking and stay alert. When you're drunk or using drugs, you're more likely to do things you wouldn't normally do when you're sober. Other people may take advantage of you when you're out of it. Now, this advice was attacked by one of our best-known rape activists, Nina Funnell, and she was writing, of course, on the ABC, where she denounced universities for still teaching don't get raped rather than don't rape. Surprise, surprise, the advice to women has since been removed from the Party Safe page. Every attempt to educate women about the risks of drinking too much are being howled down by feminists, claiming this is victim blaming. Here's a local police force campaign in England that was closed down. So now there's not a hint of don't get raped in the university's virtue signalling activity, which followed the release of the Human Rights Commission data. With most of our media choosing to misrepresent the figures and promote the fake rape crisis, our universities have fallen into line and launched 24-hour helplines for rape victims, sexual assault counsellors, and online consent courses for students and for some staff. Consent courses which put all the onus for preventing sexual assault squarely on the shoulders of young men. I'm sure we're going to find that here, as has happened overseas, there'll be wonderful opportunities for some men to ingratiate themselves with women by proving their feminist credentials. Look at this hilarious shot. I've spent the last few weeks having a good look at these online consent courses, and boy are they strange. Most are adapted from an epigeum course constructed by proud feminists such as Californian consultant Alan Berkovich, who boasts of his ongoing battle against unconscious sexism and male privilege. He's a classic white knight, brown noser, ingratiating himself to feminists by distancing himself from unsavoury male behaviour.
I was in a fraternity for 1 hour. I pledged a fraternity, and the pledge party, they got a bunch of women from another campus, and they were going to get them all drunk and take advantage of them in some room upstairs. And that put me in such like a moral crisis that 1 hour after I was initiated, I resigned from the fraternity.
So naturally, what Berkovich has produced is a sexual consent course aimed squarely at teaching nasty men to behave themselves. The program pretends to be gender neutral and even includes some gay couples and the occasional female perpetrator amongst the case histories. For instance, look at this one where a woman ponders going down on her sleeping partner and then she's later congratulated for restraining herself. But the thrust of the program is clearly pitched at teaching young men to decipher women's messages around consent. This is pretty typical of the sort of stuff they're showing. What's really odd is the person being questioned is so rarely directly addressed in the program. It's assumed that women are inert. They're like pot plants on a gardening show, which is teaching people how to determine if the plant has dried out. Are the leaves wilting? Flowers dropping off? Insert fingers into the soil to test for dampness. RMIT social justice professor Nicola Henry, who's an expert at epigeum, boasts on video that the program focuses on perpetrators and bystanders rather than victims.
Appropriate primary prevention and educational campaigns that focus on the perpetrator and bystanders and don't focus all the attention on victims.
So these Don't Rape programs have no interest in teaching women to take proper ownership of the decision-making process that leads to a yes or no, let alone encouraging them to express those wishes clearly rather than keeping men guessing. Back in the 1990s, I made a program on sexual consent, yes, no, maybe, as a guest reporter on Four Corners, to the dismay of many in the organisation, as you can imagine. The program was addressing the simplistic no means no campaigning prevalent at the time. I had no trouble finding women who acknowledged that they sometimes deliberately drink in order to avoid making decisions around consent. Women who said that sometimes it's far easier to obliterate themselves and just get carried away rather than taking responsibility and making a decision about embarking on a sexual relationship. Women who admitted to playing games where they say no but want men to push through that resistance, which of course is a really common theme in the hugely popular bodice ripper novels. None of these complexities are addressed in the sexual consent programs. The gender-neutral programs contain only a few gems of advice which arguably target women. You always have the right to change your mind about any kind of sexual activity, even right before or during sex. And also, if someone forces or tries to force you to do something sexual that you don't want to do, remember it's never your fault and it's not okay. Of course, I'm not denying the importance of the don't rape message. Sexual assault is rightly a very serious criminal offence. And it probably makes sense to change the male culture so bystanders are empowered to intervene when women are being harassed or attacked. Yet it's shocking that feminists have persuaded our universities to absolve women of all responsibility for behaving sensibly and not putting themselves in harm's way. Young women in our universities are being taught it's okay to lead a man on, okay to encourage him to think she's not interested in having sex, to give no sign that she's ambivalent about consent and then to change her mind afterwards and charge him with rape. How is that fair? How is that teaching women to be moral, responsible adults with a duty to behave reasonably towards the opposite sex, towards the men in their lives? Why are the rights of decent young men not being protected? Here's Camille Poli talking at the Battle of Ideas about how her generation fought for the right of women to be treated as adults when it came to their sex lives.
When my generation arrived in college, I arrived in 1964 in college, and the colleges still believed they had the right and obligation to act in loco parentis, in place of the parent. Therefore, the women's dormitories, women were compelled to sign in at 11 o'clock at night, so we were safely inside. The men could run free, for the whole night. We're the ones who said, get out of our private lives. And the colleges said, no, the world is dangerous. We must protect you against rape. And what my generation said was, give us the freedom to risk rape. That is true adulthood, for women.
In America, we've seen where this infantilizing of women actually leads. From university campuses across the states, we see rape accusations from women who are unhappy about relationships ending, women who have too much to drink and then end up in bed with a man, women who have any reason whatsoever to regret having sex. All these women are being given absolute license to lie about what happened and accuse these young men of rape. And the men are being thrown out of college, it's ruining their education, derailing their lives as a result of women misrepresenting the truth about what happened between them. I wrote about the famous Columbia Mattress girl case last month, where a young man falsely accused of rape was humiliated for 3 years by her carrying around a mattress on campus. The university was successfully sued by the man and paid him a huge settlement. And even when their falsehoods are proved in court, there are no consequences for these women for misrepresenting the truth. These sexual consent courses are bringing out the worst in women, teaching them that it's fine to lie about sex, and that is morally reprehensible. So we have this dangerous rubbish being fed to women on our campuses, and it's not even helping cut down the chance that real rape will occur. The evidence suggests this blaming men, passive women approach simply doesn't work, as shown in an article published in the New England Journal of Medicine 2 years ago. Efficacy of Sexual Assault Resistance Program for University Women. That's how the leading author, Canadian sociology professor Charlene Sen, sums up the disappointing results of programs similar to those which are being introduced in Australia. Sen and her colleagues found that using a resistance program which teaches women to recognise dangerous situations and to resist sexual coercion reduces the incidence of rape by up to 50%. Rape resistance is about teaching women how to say no earlier and more effectively, helping them be more confident and sure of their own desires and get past emotional roadblocks to resist unwanted sexual behaviour. At least this is a step in the right direction, requiring women to have some agency in the whole business of avoiding unwanted sex. Yet Sen, who describes herself as a feminist activist, has her own blinkers on. For instance, she defines sexual assault as including sex because you feared you might lose your relationship if you didn't. What? And that's sexual assault? Even if you didn't tell the man that that was the reason you were having sex? That's totally absurd. And Sen is also dead against telling women to let fear restrict their lives. If you're drinking 12 drinks, there's no risk of rape unless there's someone around willing to rape. The risk is not in the alcohol, she says. This argument is insulting to women and unfair to men. Here's what Karen Strawn has to say about this. For those who don't know her, Karen is the best known woman in the men's rights movement and makes wonderful vlogs about this sort of issue. In the feminist narrative regarding drunkenness and sex, only men retain agency, she says. Women are reduced to infantilized objects without the capacity for volition. She was drunk, enough said. She bears no responsibility. Yet the drunk man's identical decision is subject to heightened scrutiny. He was drunk, enough said. He instigated the entire thing, and his drunkenness does not absolve him of responsibility. In effect, it makes him more morally culpable. How can that possibly be fair? What's weird is we're quite happy to encourage female responsibility in other aspects of life. We've managed to educate most young women that drink driving isn't a good idea. They know that they'll face the consequences if they get plastered and drive and kill a pedestrian. Being drunk isn't an excuse if they stab a homeless man to death or molest a child. Where's the logic in women being absolved of all responsibility if they get drunk and make stupid decisions exposing themselves to sexual harm? It's pretty obvious that it would help cut down the risks of sexual assault on university campuses by doing something about the high levels of drug and alcohol consumption amongst these students. I've been talking to some of the experts in this area, and they admit that we're not even keeping proper statistics about whether drug and alcohol is involved in sexual assault claims for ideological reasons. I made the mistake of talking to a female professor who works in this area, and she was absolutely horrified that I was even raising the question of whether women sometimes drink when they're sexually assaulted. Yet there are plenty of others in the field who acknowledge that it's really important that we teach men and women to stay sober enough to make good decisions around sexual consent. But in the meantime, we're stuck in this la-la land with many of our students being forced to sit through this infantile propaganda about sexual consent. Some years ago, the Thames Valley Police and various rape crisis groups put out a video called Tea and Consent, all about sexual consent, and it went totally viral.
If you're still struggling with consent, just imagine instead of initiating sex, you're making them a cup of tea. You say, "Hey, would you like a cup of tea?" And they go, "Oh my God, I would love a cup of tea, thank you." Then you know they want a cup of tea. If you say, "Hey, would you like a cup of tea?" And they're like, I'm not really sure. Then you can make them a cup of tea, or not, but be aware that they might not drink it. And if they don't drink it, then, and this is the important bit, don't make them drink it. Just because you made it doesn't mean you're entitled to watch them drink it. And if they say, no thank you, then don't make them tea. At all. Just don't make them tea.
And so it goes on. I don't think for one moment that all those people have watched that video because it offered penetrating insights into the whole business of sexual consent. It seems much more likely that we all concluded it was totally daft, given the number of spoofs that followed the video. Here's one of my favourites.
OK, so you've mastered the basic premise of tea and consent, but you still have questions. For example, how do you prove, after someone has come round for a cup of tea, asked you to make them tea, and thanked you for the lovely tea, that any of that actually happened? The answer is, you can't. You see, tea and consent are guidelines to improve society, not a protection for the individual. The fact is, there is no safe tea. Imagine someone comes round your place and says, I fancy a cup of tea. And you say, certainly, while you're actually thinking, yay, I'm finally going to make tea for someone else. So you brew the tea, get out the fine china and ask for their preferences. They then drink the tea and ask for a biscuit. Now the important bit is you didn't force them to drink the tea. Actually, they asked for another cup and you were a bit tired, but said, of course. You brewed the tea, got them a new setting, and you brought them 2 biscuits. Now, and this is the important bit, you didn't force them to drink the tea or eat the biscuits. So they drink the tea, eat the biscuits, and thank you for a lovely time, and leave. You're exhausted and think, wow, that's what tea is all about. Then you take a long nap and don't hear from them again. You're a modern and highly evolved person. You don't call round or ask after them because clearly this is how they want things to be. Then you're on social media and you find that they're sharing pictures of themselves having tea with other people. Lots of other people. You start to get worried. You go and get yourself tested, but you remain quiet and make no comment. Your tests come back negative and you think, phew, thank goodness, tea wasn't worth that kind of stress. So you find a good book to read. And then there's a knock at the door. And you're thinking, what if it's them and they want tea? How do I handle that? You needn't have worried. It's the police. They're here to question you about an act of forcible tea, but only after they beat you about the head and shoulders. You're charged with forcible tea and resisting arrest without violence.
Okay, everybody, I hope you enjoyed that vlog. I'm finding this all rather hard work for very little pay, so it'd be really nice if you could think about supporting me financially through Patreon, but or at least like my vlogs, tell other people about them, get the word out that we're trying to talk about really important issues here, and the more people that see them, the better for me. Thanks very much.